Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The courtroom smelled like old wood and recycled air, the kind that had absorbed years of whispered confessions, broken promises, and quiet despair. Naomi Washington stood at the petitioner's table in a tailored navy dress that skimmed her knees, her hands loosely clasped in front of her. Her back was straight, chin lifted, eyes fixed on the judge. She refused to look at the man sitting across the aisle. The fluorescent lights above hummed softly, reflecting off the polished wooden benches and the worn brass nameplate that read, Judge Harold Lawrence. The murmur of the gallery dimmed as the clerk called the case, and the sound of people settling into their seats was like a low wave breaking and then receding into silence. Naomi drew in a slow, measured breath and felt the weight of 8 years pressing down on her shoulders. Across from her, at the respondent's table, Leonard Sterling sat with one ankle resting on his knee, his custom charcoal suit perfectly pressed, his tie a deep burgundy that matched the pocket square tucked neatly into his jacket. He leaned back in his chair as though this was another board meeting that he was destined to win. His attorney, Charles Henson, was whispering something to him, but Leonard's eyes were not on the documents in front of him. They were on Naomi. He studied her face with the same detached curiosity he reserved for quarterly reports and profit charts, like he was trying to calculate what she would cost him. Behind him in the gallery, his mother, Constance, sat ramrod straight in a cream suit, a string of pearls resting at her throat, her lips pinched into a line of disapproval. Next to her, legs crossed and expression smug, sat Brittany Hall, Leonard's executive assistant and the woman who had turned a crumbling marriage into a public humiliation. Case number 24D1189, Washington versus Sterling, the clerk announced. Petition for dissolution of marriage and equitable distribution. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Naomi felt them reverberate through her chest. Dissolution. Equitable. Words that looked clean and sharp on paper, but in reality, were soaked in years of compromise and sacrifice. Judge Lawrence adjusted his glasses, glanced down at the file, then looked up at both tables. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm, carrying easily through the room. "Are counsel ready to proceed?" Charles rose smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. On Naomi's side, her attorney, Paula Green, stood as well, her expression composed, her dark eyes steady. "Ready for the petitioner, Your Honor," Paula replied. "Very well," Judge Lawrence said. "Mr. Henson, since there is a prenuptial agreement at issue, and you are asserting its enforcement as the basis of your client's proposed settlement, I will hear from you first." Charles nodded and stepped forward. Naomi watched him with a clinical detachment she did not feel, forcing herself to breathe evenly. She could almost predict his opening lines. She had lived inside this story for months, documented every lie, every late-night email, every expense account that had nothing to do with business. She knew what they thought of her. Leonard's voice echoed in her memory like a bruise that never fully faded. "You will not take my company. You will not take my legacy. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad, Naomi. You walked into this with your eyes open." She had. She just had not known how much of the truth he had hidden. "Your Honor," Charles began, his tone practiced and smooth. "This is, at its core, a straightforward case. My client and Mrs. Washington, then Miss Washington, entered into a comprehensive prenuptial agreement prior to their marriage. The agreement clearly delineates the separate nature of Mr. Sterling's premarital assets, including his ownership in Sterling Logistics Group, as well as the growth and appreciation of those assets throughout the marriage. Mrs. Washington has been provided for generously, both during the marriage and now in Mr. Sterling's proposed settlement." He gestured toward the document on the table. "We are offering a lump sum of $200,000, the marital townhouse in Decatur, and the 2020 Toyota Highlander. Given the enforceability of the prenuptial agreement and Mrs. Washington's limited financial contribution to the growth of Sterling Logistics, this is more than fair." Naomi felt a ripple move through the gallery behind her. She did not have to turn to know what expressions she would see. Some would be sympathetic. Others would be curious, entertained by the spectacle of a wealthy divorce. Near the back, an older woman in a teal blazer shook her head slightly. A younger man in a gray hoodie leaned forward, eyes glued to Leonard as though watching a television drama unfold. Naomi kept her gaze on Judge Lawrence. "Limited financial contribution," she repeated silently. It was almost impressive, the way a person could compress 8 years of unpaid labor, late nights, and strategic planning into 3 dismissive words. Next to her, Paula remained motionless, but Naomi could see the tension in her jaw. Judge Lawrence steepled his fingers. "Mr. Henson," he said, "I have reviewed the prenuptial agreement and the preliminary financial disclosures from both parties. We will, of course, examine the circumstances under which this agreement was executed. I will also need to consider any evidence regarding contributions that may not be strictly financial in nature. Marriage is not strictly a ledger." For a moment, the judge's gaze flicked toward Naomi, then back to Charles. "But we will come to that. You mentioned Mrs. Washington's limited financial contribution. Please elaborate." Charles nodded. "Of course, Your Honor. At the time of the marriage, Mr. Sterling already owned a controlling interest in Sterling Logistics Group, a regional freight and transportation company headquartered here in Atlanta. The company had been in his family for 2 generations, built primarily by his father, the late Henry Sterling. During the marriage, Mr. Sterling continued to grow the business. It was his strategic vision, his leadership, and his management that turned a regional operation into a national brand. Meanwhile, Mrs. Washington left her position in corporate finance and did not return to the workforce in any significant capacity. That was the version of the story Leonard preferred, Naomi thought. He had repeated it at dinner parties and industry events, polished it until it gleamed. "My father built the foundation. I scaled the company." It sounded clean. It left out the nights Naomi spent hunched over spreadsheets at their kitchen table, balancing cash flow projections while Leonard slept. It ignored the fact that it had been Naomi who suggested restructuring the company's debt before the market shifted. Naomi who convinced Henry that diversifying into warehousing would stabilize revenue when fuel prices spiked. It erased the hours she spent smoothing things over with longtime employees when Leonard's aggressive expansion plans made them nervous. It dismissed the fundraisers she organized, the community relationships she nurtured that later turned into city contracts. She had not drawn a paycheck from Sterling Logistics, but she had banked years of unpaid expertise and emotional labor. Now reduced to limited financial contribution, she was expected to nod and accept a car and a townhouse. Paula rose, her voice cutting through Naomi's thoughts. "Your Honor, may I respond?" Judge Lawrence nodded. "Briefly, Ms. Green. We will move to testimony soon." Paula stepped forward, placing one hand lightly on the petitioner's table. "The picture Mr. Henson has painted is incomplete," she said. "Yes, there is a prenuptial agreement. Yes, Mr. Sterling's father built the company. However, the agreement's enforceability is not nearly as clear as opposing counsel suggests, and Mrs. Washington's contributions, while not reflected in a paycheck, were substantial and documented. We contend that the prenuptial agreement was entered into under conditions that call its fairness into question, and that the growth of Sterling Logistics during the marriage was due in large part to Mrs. Washington's unpaid professional contributions and sacrifices." Leonard shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. Naomi saw his hand curl into a fist on the table before he forced it flat again. He did not like the word sacrifices. He preferred terms like strategy and leverage. Sacrifice, to him, was a story other people told themselves to feel better about losing. Naomi remembered the day she signed the prenuptial agreement. They had been in Henry's study, the walls lined with books and framed black and white photographs of trucks and warehouses. Henry had handed her the document with an apologetic smile. "This is just business, Naomi," he had said. "You know how these things are. I have spent my life building this company for my son. I need to make sure it stays protected." She had read every line, even as the engagement party buzzed downstairs, the sounds of music and laughter spilling faintly under the door. Leonard had stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "You know I love you," he had said quietly. "This is just a formality. It does not change us." She had believed him. She had believed Henry when he added, "If things are ever truly unfair, I will make it right. I promise you that." Henry had died 3 years into the marriage, a sudden heart attack that left the company and Leonard reeling. Naomi had stepped into the chaos willingly, helping to stabilize operations while Leonard took on the role of chief executive officer. She had been the one who found the right interim operations director, the one who calmed nervous investors at a tense meeting in downtown Atlanta by walking them step by step through a restructuring plan she had drafted late one night while Leonard stared listlessly at the television. No one had called her contributions limited then. Henry's oldest friend, a board member named Harold Sanders, had clasped her hand after that meeting and said, "If he is smart, he will never forget what you just did for this company." Leonard had forgotten anyway. "We will dig into the details in due course," Judge Lawrence said now, his tone even. "For the moment, let us proceed with testimony. Mrs. Washington, please take the stand." Naomi's stomach tightened, but her legs moved steadily as she followed the bailiff's gesture. She walked to the witness stand, placed her left hand on the Bible, and raised her right. The oath was familiar. She had rehearsed this moment in her head countless times. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the clerk asked. "I do," Naomi replied. Her voice sounded clear, even to her own ears, and that steadiness surprised her. She settled into the chair, adjusted the microphone, and forced herself not to glance at Leonard as she did. Paula approached, her expression softening slightly as she looked at Naomi. "Mrs. Washington," she began, "can you tell the court how you and Mr. Sterling met?" Naomi nodded. "We met 12 years ago at a financial conference in Chicago," she said. "I was working as a senior analyst for a consulting firm, and he was there with his father, presenting on family-owned businesses transitioning into their second generation. We ended up sitting at the same table during a breakout session. He asked me a question about a case study I had commented on. We talked for almost an hour." Her mouth curved in a small, distant smile that did not reach her eyes. "After that, he found reasons to call. We started seeing each other. I was living in Houston at the time, and he would fly out for the weekend. It felt exciting. It felt like we were building something together from the very beginning." "When did discussions about marriage and the prenuptial agreement begin?" Paula asked. Naomi exhaled slowly. "He proposed 2 years after we met," she said. "He took me to a rooftop restaurant in downtown Atlanta. There were candles, flowers, the whole thing. I said yes. A few weeks later, he brought up the prenuptial agreement. He said his father's attorneys were insisting on it. He framed it as something that would protect us from gold digger accusations and keep the company insulated from messy legal disputes. I was hurt, but I also understood that he had grown up wealthy and cautious. I asked to review the agreement privately, and I did. I even took it to a friend in law school to explain some of the clauses. I knew it was not favorable to me, but Henry pulled me aside one evening and said, 'We will take care of you. This is paper. Family is what matters.' I believed that. Did anyone pressure you to sign?" Paula asked. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the witness stand. "No one threatened me," she said carefully. "But there was pressure. The agreement was presented 2 days before the engagement party, with vendors already paid and guests flying in. Leonard asked me more than once if I trusted him. Henry reminded me that this was how things were done in his world. I told myself I was overreacting, that this was about business, not love. I signed." Paula nodded. "After you married, did you continue working?" "I did for the first year," Naomi said. "Then Leonard and I had several conversations about my career. He said the company needed someone he trusted to help with strategy informally. He asked me to step back from my job so I could focus on supporting him and the business. He promised that we were a team and that what was his was mine. I eventually left my position and started working behind the scenes for Sterling Logistics, without a formal salary or title." "Can you describe that work?" Paula asked. "Yes," Naomi said. "I reviewed financial statements. I identified inefficiencies in their freight routes. I suggested shifting some of the short-haul runs to smaller subcontractors to save on fuel and maintenance, which increased profit margins. I created a presentation that Leonard later used with investors when they were considering expanding into warehousing. I also organized charity drives and community outreach events that improved the company's public image and led to new municipal contracts. When the company considered a merger with a competitor based in Charlotte, I spent weeks analyzing their books to show why the deal was too risky. Leonard presented my findings as his own. After the merger was rejected, he received praise from the board for his instincts. Leonard shifted again at the respondents' table, his lips pressed into a thin line. Constance whispered something to him, but he did not respond. Brittany crossed one leg over the other and stared at her manicure as if she were bored. Naomi forced herself to keep her attention on Paula. "Did you ever receive compensation, stock options, or official recognition for this work?" Paula asked. "No," Naomi said. "Leonard said the company's culture was old-fashioned, that it would cause friction with his mother and some board members if I were formally involved. He said we would handle our finances as a unit at home. He told me to be patient, that once he fully took over from his father's old team, he would make changes. Paula's eyes softened. How did things change after Henry's death? She asked. Naomi swallowed. Everything moved faster, she said. Leonard became chief executive officer. He was under a lot of pressure, and I understood that. I supported him. I stayed up with him on nights before big board meetings. I traveled with him to pitch new clients, though my name never appeared on any official documents. For a while, it felt like we were still partners. Naomi paused, and the silence drew the judge's gaze more closely. Then the distance started, she continued. He began working later, traveling more. He became more secretive with his phone and his laptop. I noticed unfamiliar names popping up on his calendars. When I asked, he said they were investors or consultants. He grew impatient when I questioned him. We fought more. I tried counseling. He went once and declared it a waste of time. Paula leaned in slightly. When did you first suspect infidelity? She asked. Naomi's throat tightened. About 1.5 years ago, she said. He came home from a trip to New York, and his shirt smelled like a perfume I did not own. He had a new assistant, Brittany Hall. He spoke about her a lot, how efficient she was, how much she was helping him. Naomi forced herself not to look at the woman sitting behind Leonard. I wanted to believe I was imagining things. I ignored my instincts longer than I should have. What changed? Paula asked quietly. Naomi drew in a breath. One night, he fell asleep with his phone on the nightstand, she said. A message came in around midnight. The preview showed Brittany's name and part of the message. It said, I miss you already. Today was, and then it cut off. I stared at it for a long time. Eventually, I opened the thread. There were months of messages. They were not just professional. They talked about trips, about how he felt understood by her. There were pictures. There were hotel room numbers. I realized that entire business trips had been excuses. A murmur rippled through the courtroom again. Judge Lawrence lifted a hand, and the room quieted. What did you do when you found those messages? Paula asked. I confronted him the next morning, Naomi said. He did not deny it. He said our marriage had been over for a long time, that we had grown apart. He said I had made the company my identity and smothered him with advice. He accused me of not understanding his pressures. Then he reminded me of the prenuptial agreement. He said that if I wanted to leave, I would leave with what the agreement allowed, a modest settlement and whatever car he decided to sign over. Naomi remembered the moment vividly. Leonard had stood in their kitchen with his coffee mug in hand, speaking calmly, almost clinically. You will not ruin me in court, he had said. You will not touch my company. This entire life was built before you. Be grateful for what I offer, Naomi. Take the townhouse. Take the car. You like independence. Now you can have it. She remembered the way her hands had trembled, not with shock, but with the sudden clarity of finally seeing the man in front of her without the soft focus of love. She had thought of Henry's promise, whispered in that paneled study. If things are ever truly unfair, I will make it right. At the time, Henry had seemed immortal, all booming laughter and iron will. Death had come anyway, leaving questions and paperwork behind. Naomi had not expected the paperwork to save her. After that conversation, Paula said, drawing Naomi back to the present. What steps did you take? Naomi straightened slightly. I contacted you, she said. I told you everything. You asked for documents, emails, spreadsheets, board presentations. You asked about Henry's estate and the will. At first, I did not think there was anything there. I thought the prenuptial agreement would override everything. But then I started remembering conversations with Henry. Passing comments. One evening, after a particularly tense board meeting, he had called me into his office. He closed the door and said, My son is brilliant, but he is arrogant, Naomi. He does not always see the value standing right in front of him. If he ever forgets who helped him, there are things in place. I did not understand then what he meant. I assumed he was talking about bonuses or promotions for long-term employees. After I spoke with you, I started wondering if he meant something else. Paula nodded. What did we eventually discover? She asked. Naomi turned her gaze briefly toward Leonard. For the first time that morning, she looked directly at him. His eyes were cold, but there was a flicker of something else there now, uncertainty. Your firm obtained a copy of Henry's last will and testament from the probate records, Naomi said. It referenced a separate document, a letter of instruction, that had been sent to the then chair of the board of Sterling Logistics and to a law firm in downtown Atlanta. That document was not initially filed with the will. You subpoenaed it. When it arrived, you read it, and then you told me to come to your office immediately. Naomi remembered the way Paula had stood when she walked into the conference room that day, a stack of papers in her hand, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across her face as she said, "You need to sit down. Can you summarize in your own words what that letter said?" Paula asked. Naomi nodded, feeling the weight of the courtroom's attention turn sharper. "Henry wrote the letter 2 months before he died," she said. In it, he detailed his view of the company's growth over the previous 5 years. He mentioned the restructuring plans, the diversification into warehousing, the decision not to pursue the Charlotte merger, the municipal contracts. He specifically stated that many of those strategic decisions were created or heavily influenced by me. He wrote that he had invited me into conversations that traditionally would not have included a fiancé or spouse because he recognized my expertise. He went on to say that, in his opinion, without my contributions, the company's valuation at that point would have been significantly lower. The courtroom was so quiet now that Naomi could hear someone in the gallery shift their feet and the faint clicking of Constance's bracelet as she tightened her grip on her clutch. Henry then addressed the prenuptial agreement, Naomi continued. He wrote that he had insisted on it to protect the company from what he called worst-case scenarios, but that he had become concerned about Leonard's attitude. He wrote, "If my son ever seeks to use this agreement as a weapon to discard Naomi after she has helped him build what he now enjoys, it would be unconscionable." He explained that he had taken steps to prevent that. Specifically, he created a trust that held an additional 28% of Sterling Logistics stock. In the letter, he instructed that, if Leonard filed for divorce or attempted to enforce the prenuptial agreement in a way that left me with what he deemed less than a fair share of the marital estate, the trust would automatically transfer ownership of that stock to me. A gasp went through the courtroom then, louder and less controlled than the earlier murmurs. Even Judge Lawrence's eyebrows rose slightly before he schooled his expression back to neutrality. Leonard's chair scraped against the floor as he half rose, then sat back down when Charles placed a hand firmly on his arm. Constance leaned forward, her eyes wide, her lips parted. Brittany's smile had vanished entirely, leaving a strained blankness in its place. The letter also stated, Naomi added, that in such a circumstance, the board was instructed to convene an emergency meeting to consider whether Leonard should remain as chief executive officer, given his judgment concerning both the company and his personal life. Henry wrote, "A man who treats his partner as disposable will eventually treat his people and his obligations the same way." Paula turned to the bench. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to move this letter into evidence as Petitioner's Exhibit 14, she said. Judge Lawrence nodded slowly. "So moved," he said. "I have read the letter in chambers. It is unusual, but not without precedent in terms of testamentary instruments expressing conditions regarding trusts." He tapped his pen lightly against the arm of his chair. "Mr. Henson, I imagine you will have questions about the letter's legal effect, but I can assure you I am fully aware of the implications with respect to the prenuptial agreement and the marital estate." Charles cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we contend that the letter reflects Henry Sterling's personal opinions, not binding legal directives that can override a valid prenuptial agreement." Judge Lawrence smiled faintly. "Mr. Henson, whether the trust itself is valid and what it owns is not a matter of opinion. The trustees have already confirmed its existence, and the transfer of stock triggered by the filing of this petition. We will, of course, address how that affects valuation, but the fact is that a significant portion of what used to be your client's company is now Mrs. Washington's separate property. The court cannot pretend that does not exist." Naomi felt something inside her loosen. A knot she had carried so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. For months, Leonard had spoken as though everything was already decided, as though the prenuptial agreement was a stone tablet carved with her fate. The discovery of the letter had not erased the pain of betrayal, but it had changed the landscape of the battle. Henry had not lived to see this day, but his words had crossed the distance between life and death to stand beside her. Paula turned back to Naomi. "Mrs. Washington," she said, "given what we now know about the trust and the transfer of stock, what are you seeking from this court?" Naomi lifted her chin a fraction higher. "I am not asking to be made rich at Leonard's expense," she said. "I am asking for recognition of my contributions and fair treatment under the law. I am asking that the court refuse to enforce the prenuptial agreement in a way that leaves me with a fraction of what we built together while he keeps everything else. I am asking that the marital assets, including the increase in value of his original shares, be divided equitably. There was a long silence. Leonard stared at her, his eyes burning with disbelief and anger. "You are trying to steal my company," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the courtroom's quiet. "You are using my father's paranoia and some technicality to take what I built." Judge Lawrence's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Sterling," he said, "you will have an opportunity to testify and to respond to your wife's statements. You will not speak out of turn again." Leonard's nostrils flared. "She did not build this," he insisted, ignoring the warning. "She played house. She hosted dinners. She organized charity events. That letter," Judge Lawrence interrupted, his tone firm, "was written by a man who knew you far longer than I have, Mr. Sterling. And it is corroborated by the documentary record of your company's growth, the emails, and the minutes we have reviewed. Sit down." Leonard sank back into his chair, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the polished wood of the table. When it was Leonard's turn to testify, he tried to reframe the story. He spoke of waking up before dawn, of taking calls in different time zones, of the stress of managing warehouses in Dallas, Chicago, and Newark. He painted himself as a man under siege, pressured by investors and haunted by his father's legacy. "Naomi was supportive at first," he said, "but she became critical. She questioned every decision. It felt like I had a second board of directors at home. I do not deny that she is intelligent, but intelligence can be suffocating when it refuses to trust." Paula's cross-examination was methodical. She pulled up emails where Leonard had forwarded Naomi's spreadsheets to his operations team, passing them off as his own ideas. She highlighted calendar entries for trips that had coincided suspiciously with deposits into Brittany's bank account. She showed text messages in which Leonard told Brittany, "Naomi is too focused on the company. You are the one who makes me feel alive." Each exhibit chipped away at the image of the overburdened husband who had simply fallen out of love. By the time closing arguments arrived, the air in the courtroom felt heavy, like the moments before a summer storm breaks over the city. Charles argued that the prenuptial agreement was clear, that Henry's letter was an emotional document, not a legal roadmap. Paula countered that equity could not ignore reality, and that Henry had not merely expressed an opinion. He had rearranged ownership in a way that fundamentally altered the estate. She spoke calmly, without theatrics, but there was an undercurrent of controlled fury in her voice. "This is not a case of a spouse arriving late to a fortune and attempting to grab half on the way out," she said. "This is a case of a wife whose labor has been disguised as support, whose expertise has been repackaged as her husband's genius, and whose loyalty has been rewarded with infidelity and threats. The law exists to prevent power from becoming a weapon in exactly these circumstances." When Judge Lawrence finally delivered his ruling 2 weeks later, the courtroom was full again. Naomi sat at the same table, wearing a simple gray dress and the same small gold earrings she had worn the day she first walked into Sterling Logistics headquarters as Leonard's fiancée. Leonard's suit was darker this time, his face more drawn. Constance sat stiffer than ever, a hard glitter in her eyes. Brittany was not present. "I have reviewed the evidence, the prenuptial agreement, the trust documents, and Mr. Sterling's father's letter," Judge Lawrence began. "I have also considered the testimony and the exhibits regarding Mrs. Washington's contributions to the growth of Sterling Logistics and the marital estate." He paused, glancing briefly from one table to the other. "The prenuptial agreement is not invalid on its face. However, enforcing it strictly under these circumstances, while ignoring the subsequent creation of the trust and the reality of Mrs. Washington's contributions, would be inequitable and contrary to this court's responsibility." He continued, "The trust created by the late Mr. Sterling is valid. The transfer of 28% of Sterling Logistics stock to Mrs. Washington has occurred and is her separate property. That fact, combined with credible evidence of her unpaid professional contributions, shifts the analysis. Accordingly, this court will not enforce the prenuptial agreement in the rigid manner proposed by the respondent. Instead, I am ordering an equitable division of the marital estate, including the increased value of the original Sterling shares that can be reasonably attributed to decisions and strategies developed during the marriage. The townhouse in Decatur will be awarded to Mrs. Washington. The lump sum proposed by Mr. Sterling is insufficient. Instead, he will buy out a portion of her marital claim with a significantly higher cash award, to be determined by the valuation expert's report. Spousal support is granted for a transitional period of 3 years. He looked directly at Leonard. You are a capable businessman, Mr. Sterling. You will recover financially, but you will not do so by discarding your partner and pretending her work never existed. Naomi did not realize she had been holding her breath until she felt it rush out in a soft, shaking exhale. She did not smile. The victory did not feel triumphant. It felt like relief mixed with the ache of something broken beyond repair. Leonard stared straight ahead, his face unreadable. Constance's lips pressed together so tightly that the color drained from them. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway lined with dull beige walls and vending machines humming quietly, Naomi paused. Paula touched her arm. You did it, Paula said. We did it, Naomi replied. Her voice was quiet but firm. He does not get to rewrite everything. Paula nodded. What will you do now? She asked. Naomi looked toward the glass doors at the end of the hallway, where thin winter sunlight filtered in, turning the scuffed tile floor into a dull reflection. I will build something that has my name on it from the beginning, she said. No secret trusts. No promises whispered in wood-paneled studies. Just contracts I sign myself. She allowed herself the smallest of smiles. And I will make sure every woman I work with understands exactly what her contributions are worth. As Naomi stepped outside, the air felt sharper, cooler than when she had walked into the courthouse that morning. The street in downtown Atlanta buzzed with its own rhythm. Cars passing, a delivery truck idling at the curb, a pair of teenagers laughing as they crossed at the light. Life moved on, indifferent to the stories unfolding inside the building behind her. She glanced back once, seeing only the reflection of the sky in the courthouse windows. Leonard would face his own reckoning with the board, with the investors, with the people who had once believed every polished version of his story. That was no longer her concern. She walked down the steps slowly, each step a small, deliberate choice. For years, she had been the invisible architect behind someone else's empire. Now, finally, every step belonged to her. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.